So looking ahead, as AI becomes increasingly integral to business operations, how critical will it be to develop strong data and AI literacy for organizations aiming to maintain a competitive edge in their markets?
That's the beauty of data. If you can create a culture where you are open to the fact that data exposes challenges and therefore we can solve them, then that is the most competitive advantage in the market, because you'll see the trends, you'll see the opportunities, you'll see the ways that you're struggling ahead of your competitors, and you'll put the solutions in place before they do. And there's nothing more competitive advantage than that, in my opinion. It's like seeing the future because data and AI allows you to do that, and therefore you get the results.
It's like small, consistent actions seem to have a much bigger payoff than one of those once-off initiatives that most companies...
100%. It's got to become, Trisha, a thing that lives and breathes within the organization. Like, if you just think you're going to do literacy once and it's going to cost you X and then you're done, you're going to be sadly disappointed, because actually new people come into the business, new people come into the culture. It has to be something that is built to live and breathe.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Tech Transform, the podcast where we explore how technology is reshaping the enterprise landscape. I'm your host, Trisha Pillay, podcast producer and editor here at EM360 Tech. And today we're exploring a critical but sometimes overlooked aspect of successful digital strategy, and that is data and AI literacy. Without it, even the best data initiatives risk falling flat. I'm joined by Greg Freeman, founder of the Data Literacy Academy. Greg helps organizations build real confidence with data, not just through tools, but by shifting mindset and culture. He's all about making data work for people, not just the systems. Greg, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Hey, Trisha, lovely to be here.
Before we get into the discussion, give us a glimpse behind the curtain. Who are you and what drives the work you do in the world of data and AI literacy?
My name's Greg Freeman. I'm the CEO and founder of Data Literacy Academy. Our mission's really simple. It's to bring people on the journey of data and AI. And that comes from a background where I myself worked more on the technical side of the industry, worked for a vendor that used to deliver really effective data programs, actually, data software programs into large businesses. But the more we did good work, the more we saw that people on the other side just didn't know how to actually make decisions with the data. The business people who had spent the money in getting the data where it needed to be, investing in us, our platform, our services, they didn't know really why they were spending that money and what they were going to do with the data. And I think it's a problem that enterprise data offices face every single day. So we are here to enable that journey for the business to understand why it's invested so much money in data and ultimately use the data for better decision-making, value and ROI, which is the intrinsic value of data if we get it right.
I think that's such a clear mission. So let's build on that foundation. When we talk about data strategy, what exactly do we mean? And why is it more than just collecting and storing the actual data?
So I think the data strategy question is a really, really good one, because most data teams, most technology teams, most IT teams, wherever data sits, have a premise of what they think they want to do with data and AI. And a lot of that will come down to the technology infrastructure they want to build, the architecture design. There'll be lots of conversations around data silos, and if we invest in this technology or in this hyperscaler's technology, we'll fix all that. Actually, I think a good data strategy is compounded by the work you do around the people. And I think one of the mistakes people make is seeing a data strategy, or now an AI strategy, as a primarily technical program of work. And typically that's where most of the money is invested. It's the guiding direction, theoretically, for the business's journey with data and AI. But when it actually comes down to it, when it actually gets to the rubber hitting the road, most of the time is spent implementing the operating model that sits underneath it, purely in those technical spaces. So we hire more data professionals. We put more data technology in. actually that strategy needs to be verified and kind of justified and validated by the people on the business side. And I think that's a massive gap at the moment, that there's not enough collaboration between the technical teams and the business teams when that data strategy is being built, which is why fundamentally, beyond the tech infrastructure, where we store data, how we move it between different locations, it never seems to really go beyond that. It becomes a technical document rather than a strategic value driving document. And I think fundamentally that's where the people and culture side of it comes in. But the biggest thing I see as a mistake that data and technical leaders make is that over indexing on the technology and the infrastructure side and thinking that that is what a data and AI strategy is, when actually there's so much more to it than that now.
So it's basically an idea of strategy with intention. And when you look at that, why do you think so many data strategies fail despite significant investments? You did touch on it briefly now, but where does the gap usually lie?
I think data strategies fail because, in some ways, because the industry, and it's an industry that I've been part of, and I say this quite often, it's an industry that Silicon Valley is built on, right? Silicon Valley is built on technology investment in scale, venture capital investment in fast growth technology companies who promise the silver bullet solution to the next problem somebody might face when delivering their data or AI strategy. So if too much emphasis is put on that side of it, and most people who work in data, technology, and IT are by nature much more technical. That's probably why they ended up working on that side of the industry. I think they really struggle to take a step back and think about a time when they weren't that person. And therefore, they can't imagine a world where most of the business doesn't care about data, doesn't care about AI. They get this sense or this feeling of appetite from the business, because no doubt the data office will have people who are clawing for more data. They've constantly got requests. It's all the right noises. But really, when you take a step back, that's a very small population within the business. Typically less than 20% of people will actually be in that kind of high appetite, data enthusiast, as we call it, category. But I feel often the data strategy is built around the premise of a constant echo chamber within the data office and within the technology teams, probably supported by a bit more of an echo chamber from those business-sided people who are more technically interested and more numerate and data-minded. And therefore, you end up with 20% of the people guiding what is considered the need for the business and the data strategy. I think if people thought wider and went beyond that 20% of people who are just more on the journey already, the data strategy would look very different. And the way it would look different is it would reach out to the business more. It would be entirely led by solving business problems that people care about, not just thinking about foundational technology infrastructure, what are quite frankly boring topics like data governance and data quality. Like, they are not going to get anybody excited in that 80%. In fact, they're barely going to get anybody excited in the 20%. So if we spend all of our time in that strategy execution, that operating model, thinking about the things that we're not denying are important, because the things I've just mentioned, albeit boring, are important. If we spend too long thinking about those things, we don't unlock that 80% of people, which in our opinion is where culture, literacy, change management really becomes the key driver of success. And in our opinion, longer term, is the thing that keeps chief data officers in their job, keeps the data office looking successful to the business and delivering value, because it is so much more than technology. But only if you really consider the needs of the 80%, who are that silent majority of people who don't instantly care about what you're doing, rather than over-indexing on the feedback loop from the 20% of people who do.
I think it's interesting because like you're saying, it's so often the narrative is that we need better tools, but really it sounds like we just need better alignment. So in your experience, what are the biggest barriers organizations rather face in building this kind of literacy?
It depends on the organization. And I know that's quite obvious because the world is full of very different organizations. But if you take an organization where they've got an extremely technical data leader or an extremely technically minded IT leader, whatever it might be, I think that in a sense is a complete barrier. So if the person who's leading the data function doesn't have the openness and the vision to see that this is a problem, that's kind of barrier number one. And it's a super simple one. And it's the reason that a lot of organizations are not investing in this space right now, if I'm honest. Above that, I think you've got some other areas like executives who don't really understand investing in the more intangible areas of data and technology. So I think a lot of executives feel very comfortable spending money on a technology where a good salesperson has given them a fancy presentation around the ROI it will deliver and how it will work in their world. And then actually at the end of it, they get a tangible product, whether it's software or whether it's a physical product. I think we're all better at buying tangible things than we are at building buying less tangible things. And therefore, it is more difficult for data leaders to convince executives when they're already spending a lot of money on what they've been told are silver bullet solutions to the problems that we talk about in data and AI, that actually they've got a further band of investment into their people, into their culture, when actually if you sit at the board level, quite often you're exposed to an awful lot of data and AI anyway. So you can't really imagine that everybody else in the business out there isn't. You are going to take this out into the wider organization and not everybody is going to bite your hand off for it. And you have to be okay with that. That should be considered a really insightful learning, not an outright negative. If you go out to the 80% and they don't all want it, that should be eye-opening for you. If all you've ever had is a feedback loop from the 20%. So how do we take that on board, work with the 80%, and then deliver against their requirements and their needs so that we overcome that barrier? We've got to go through a period of change management, of winning their hearts and minds to actually make them want to engage with it.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about how you mentioned how siloed many teams still are. And it's not just about skills, it's about the mindset and their behavior as well. So when you look at it, can you share any real world examples where prioritizing data literacy added significant value for an organization's data program or project?
Yeah, I think two spring to mind when I'm asked this question. And I think one thing that I will reference is I do believe that CDOs that we work with who invest in this space are more successful generally, both from their internal profile, but also their public profile. I mean, I still think the Data IQ 100 is considered the main measure for the top data leaders in the world. Such a high percentage of our customers are data leaders who are in that Data IQ 100 because they are thinking about data and AI as a holistic problem. And that is being reflected when they're put in and nominated for those types of awards. But in terms of two clients where I think it's had a massive impact, the first is one of our earliest clients. So there's a university in the UK called Aston University based in Birmingham. We are or were previously a Birmingham headquartered company. So very early on, we were able to build a relationship with them. And about 3 years ago, a new pro vice chancellor came in called Alex, who is really, really commercially minded. And what that meant for Helen Blakey, who's a brilliant chief data officer who works at Aston, was Alex came in and instantly wanted Aston to be the leading university for digital data, technology, commercialization. And it meant that data and AI and digitalization became intrinsically linked to the corporate strategy. So that's actually it's a champagne problem for a lot of chief data officers, but it's also a big responsibility and a bit of pressure for a chief data officer like Helen to really go out there and deliver. So what she did really well was not only think about how am I doing the technology, the Power BI, all the things that she has done well, but she invested really early in taking what they call their senior management group, their 135 most senior people leaders, on a very clear data literacy journey where we did all the change management, the events beforehand. They invested properly in live learning so that they could get the collaboration in the classroom and they could kind of hear the problems that those business leaders were facing. And what that meant was data was immediately considered horizontally valuable across the business. The perfect thing there is that that's then unlocked all the future cohorts for them as well, because once you've got motivated, inspired, understanding leaders, they want all their people to get educated and go through the program too. So now we're into our fifth or sixth cohort of breadth across the organization. And really, when they're on a journey to get all 2,000 employees data literate and data and AI literate by 2030 or 2028, they're really achieving that because they invested so early, and that was really admirable. On the flip side of that, you've got a business in the United States called Blue Cross Blue Shield, North Dakota, one of the big health insurers. And we have probably there one of our more technical chief data officers, actually. So Ilan Kazi is a leader in the AI space. He's on lots of government panels, all that type of stuff. But he also understood that in order for AI to be usable, trusted, it wasn't just going to be about the investment in the technology. And really early, again, he put us in front of his C-suite and said, I think this is a problem we have to solve to make this work. And what they found was they actually had a very clear 80% of people who didn't feel comfortable with data. They weren't on the journey already. So very quickly, we've accelerated through programs that have allowed the people who didn't feel like they were ready for the journey that a big, fast-paced health insurers were going to want to go on in this space, taken them on that journey and just enabled and empowered the confidence across the organization. And I think from his internal reputation and the data office's internal reputation, it's been night and day compared to if they'd just done the technology.
I think those are great examples. It really brings the concept to me. When people see the impact, it actually shifts the perception from training to real business value, right? So what is the most effective approach for organizations to build data and AI literacy? And what practical steps should enterprises or leaders take to drive success?
I think the key thing here is to understand the problem you're trying to solve. And not everybody sees the problem the way we do, but I do believe it is the problem in most enterprises, if not all enterprises. And that is that there are still two types of people within the organization. There are people who are best in class at whatever your business is. They will be the best engineers, the best manufacturers, the best salespeople, the best finance people. However that looks, they still don't wake up and think about data and AI first every time they get up in the morning. What that means is they don't see their business problems as data and AI problems. They see them as problems that are being solved in the way they've always been solved. We hire more people, we spend more time doing things manually. Probably because they're quite low confidence, they've not got the right mindset. Maybe they hate maths, and therefore because data and maths are fairly clearly linked, they really struggle with that confidence piece. On the other side of that, you've got data professionals, much better at the data side, very clever when it comes to moving data, transforming data, all the types of things that data professionals do every day. But speaking candidly, and I appreciate this is more likely to be a technical audience, technical teams are not good enough at business acumen, commercial acumen, soft skills. And as a result, you get a two-sided knowledge gap between the two types of people, and you get a two-sided communication gap between the two types of people. And if your program isn't designed to close those gaps, if it's only designed to address one of those problems or just give some people some tick box training and then we're done, you can't have a data culture without those gaps being closed. So we believe that it's a really important journey of change management, internal comms, winning hearts and minds. And that comes down not only to that 20% of people who are already engaged, but more so that 80%. That silent majority, if you don't win their hearts and minds, if you don't inspire them to come on the journey first through change management, through good communication, they're not going to want to learn and be literate anyway. So, and after that, you win the right to educate people. We believe that there's lots of different ways to skin the education cat. There's everything from like on-demand, self-paced learning, as long as it's relevant. And I think that's one of the mistakes we see. We have just released an on-demand platform, a kind of self-paced e-learning platform, but it is very, very different from what you might get on a LinkedIn Learning or an Udemy or a Coursera, where most of that education will be loaded towards technical skills and technical training. Our platform is more about mindset, behaviors, and skills. And I think that, again, is a key part of the culture. On top of that, we have always led our programs with live learning experiences because it gives people the opportunity to ask questions, collaborate with their colleagues. When we think about that two-sided gap between the data office and the business, if you're not in rooms together, if you're not talking about your problems together through the literacy program, through the communities that come off the back of them, then you're not really solving that problem. You're just giving people more skills that they'll use in isolation. So live education has always been a massive part of what we do. And then I think the things I've mentioned there, like your communities of practice, your kind of roadmaps for people to have a kind of understood journey of how they will improve their literacy and that type of thing. But yeah, it's change management, it's internal comms, and it's all different mechanisms of education in order to achieve an overarching program that closes that two-sided knowledge gap and that two-sided communication gap, and therefore gives you a more operative culture of data, I think, is the key.
So for me, it's like small, consistent actions seem to have a much bigger payoff than one of those once-off initiatives like most companies.
100%. It's got to become, Trisha, a thing that lives and breathes within the organization. Like, if you just think you're going to do literacy once and it's going to cost you X and then you're done, you're going to be sadly disappointed, because actually new people come into the business, new people come into the culture. It has to be something that is built to live and breathe.
So looking ahead, as AI becomes increasingly integral to business operations, how critical will it be to develop strong data and AI literacy for organizations aiming to maintain a competitive edge in their markets? You've touched on it, but let's dive deeper into it.
It has to be a no-brainer. I think when I compare even the way we operate as a business, but I'll tell you, I was with one of the larger insurers in the UK the other day. Insurance is a really good market for us. And what was so telling was they were already ahead of where we meet most organizations on their data and AI literacy journey. They were much more confident of like having data that proves that their people are more data literate, AI literate, that it's being adopted better than it typically would. And I think the powerful thing was they could also therefore play back the successes they were seeing from being more data and AI literate. I mean, they are leading the market in acquisition of customer, efficiency of their insurance book, all those types of things. And it's primarily down to the fact that they make more decisions more quickly because they are firstly more technologically advanced than competitors in the insurance market in data and AI, but they have more people on the front line who are able to make decisions off the back of it. And I think that competitive advantage, you only see the problems in your business if you've got data, really. I think lots of people have gut feel, in inverted commas, or hypotheses on why their business is struggling. But if you can't see it in the data, you can't really put a finger on why it might be. And therefore it makes it really difficult. And that's one of the hard things, actually. One of the things that we see particularly senior leaders struggle with is that data exposes and validates your problems very often, right? Does it create opportunity for you? Yes. Does it identify risk for you? Yes. But actually what it does is it tells you where you're underperforming. And that's usually the bits that people will hone in on and care about. You either see that as a massive win or something that scares you, and therefore you're never going to use data effectively. So if we see the problems that are in our department today and everyone else is only seeing them in 4 weeks' time, we've solved them before they become an issue. And I think that's the beauty of data. If you can create a culture where you are open to the fact that data exposes challenges and therefore we can solve them, then that is the most competitive advantage in the market, because you'll see the trends, you'll see the opportunities, you'll see the ways that you're struggling ahead of your competitors, and you'll put the solutions in place before they do. And there's nothing more competitive advantage than that, in my opinion. It's like seeing the future because data and AI allows you to do that, and therefore you get the results.
I think it's a mind shift. And I think more organizations need to embrace that now, like you said, so that they can be miles ahead when it really counts. So it's no longer a thing of it's a nice to have. I think it's a must right now, like you said. But as we close, what final insights or strategic advice would you offer to executives looking to champion data and AI literacy within their organizations?
The first thing is to believe that it's important. So if you don't believe that it's an important element of how you are going to be successful with data and AI, you are not going to be successful with data and AI literacy. I think therefore you won't be successful with data and AI, but you have to believe that. That's the first thing. The second thing, and this is where, as I've said, used the phrase before, rubber hits the road. The rubber hits the road when people start spending money on it. And when we spend money on it, we actually show the business that it matters and that it's something that we want them to invest in. So putting budget aside for the future in terms of what does this actually look like is going to be important. And then to be the face of it, to role model the behaviors, to put yourself at the forefront of programs. Some of our best programs are because the CEO, the CFO, the COO are the face of the organization. They're the face of the program when it comes to data and AI literacy. And that is a risk for you as a leader because you might not feel comfortable with it yourself, but it is the way that it's going to drive success across your organization.
Greg, thank you so much for shedding light on this important topic. Your insights remind us that data strategy goes beyond technology. It's about people and culture too. To our Tech Transform community, thanks for tuning in. If you found this episode valuable, please follow, rate, and share. Join the conversation on X and LinkedIn at 360 Tech, or visit our website for more expert insights. Until next time, stay curious and stay ahead of the trends.